he's going to have twin grandchildren, so he better act together. Okay, it wasn't that funny, but in my mind it was funnier. Tonight we have the schus of having a dear old friend of the communities and of course of my in-laws, Rabbi YY Rubinstein, who, by the way, is selling an excellent new book afterwards with inscriptions and signatures after the speech. But it's really a covet for our community to have Rabbi YY, as he's fondly known, to join us before Purim. His insights and his humor, unlike mine, is always appreciated. That wasn't bad. Thank you. For your Tuesday nights.
Self-denigration.
It's always it's my anniversary today, 17 years. Yeah, wow. Okay, I'm getting old. And it's always appreciated by multitudes of people around the globe. So without further ado, and with our honor, Rabbi.
Thank you very much. It is absolutely a joy to be back. It's been a while. Thank you to you, and thank you, Rana, very, very much for your consideration and kindness in inviting me. So I was asked to speak about Purim. I think you talked, and you wanted a bit Lebedik and etc. Of course, Purim is the quintessential merging of two themes. The first theme is, of course, miracles and hidden miracles. And the other theme is, of course, simcha and laughter. Both of them, as I hope I will be able to show you in just a second, are precisely the same thing. So, first of all, I have to remind you what it says in the end of Parshas Bo. The Ramban says famously, he talks about how many of our mitzvahs, things that we do as Jews, we talk about Zeichel Tzitz Mitzrayim, Zeichel Tzitz Mitzrayim, Zeichel Tzitz Mitzrayim. And this is what he says, the language is astonishing. He says, because Hashem doesn't do big miracles, like you'd see it's Mitzrayim all the time, you know, the one that they make movies about, splitting the Red Sea and all that stuff, because he doesn't do miracles of that scale and quality all the time, therefore we have to remind ourselves of the big miracles that points to the small miracles. This is the language of the Ramban. Krizeh Yesoid Kol HaTorah. Because that's the fundamental of the entire Torah. The small miracles, the big ones, and in fact, if you think about it, Purim and Pesach are totally opposites. They're antitheses of each other. In Pesach, you can't miss the miracles. I think the current phrase is, God is in your face. Is that the phrase? You just can't. I mean, even the advisors to Pharaoh said, "Ez be'elokim hi." There is an expression which I've been trying to master since I moved to the United States of America. I don't get this right. People say I don't pronounce this right. Just remind me to switch off my phone. And that is, forgive me if I don't get it right. Okay? Duh. I don't do it properly. But there's this expression, duh, when you just, come on, it's so obvious. That's what they said to Pharaoh. Duh, let them go. Right? And the guy just does not get it, and he will not let them go, which is all extremely sad. But that, eventually, the duh moment, which is so obvious in Pesach, is completely absent from Purim. And of course, the Gemara famously asks, how do you know, where's Esther in the Torah? And it points to a passage which says, I will surely hide my face in that day. I will certainly hide. Astir, Esther, duh, right? Same words. God's hidden there. At Purim, you have to look. But at Pesach, you don't have to look. He's in your face. And the Ramban says that the small miracles happen all the time. That's to all of us. How many times do we remind ourselves of that every day? 3 times. In the Amidah, Ba'al Nisecha, Shebekol, Yom Imam. And the miracles are with us every day. What miracle happens to you today? And sometimes when I ask this question, there is always somebody from in the audience who says, I woke up. Don't give me that. From? Not interested in that stuff. What real miracle happened to you today?
My wife still loves me.
That is a big miracle. That's Mitzrayim. That's Pesach. That's very old friends. Where until I opened my mouth a second ago. What miracle happened? I have to tell you, I was speaking last week. A very old friend just discovered I've got a fellow Mancunian sitting here. Rabbi Yehuda Brody, you knew Yehuda Brody, sadly passed away recently. And one of his sons, I was over speaking in London, and one of his sons said, my daddy always said, I don't care that YY speaks better than me, But why did all the great stories happen to him? When I wrote my first book, I told the story of being in a plane crash in South Africa. And at the same trip to South Africa, my first ever trip to South Africa, I was in a plane crash and I was bitten by a lion. I really was. And people say, you were in a plane crash? Yeah. You were bitten by a lion? Yeah. Why do things like that not happen to me? Mashugana! You think I wanted to be in a plane crash? But last week, there was a story that happened to me which is unbelievable. I want you to hear this. Look, I brought my little Bose speaker thing here. I want you to hear this story, or the important bit of the story. So I was speaking in Queens to the Bukharian Jews in Queens. Now, I don't know if you know the Bukharian Jews. The Queens Bukharian community is utterly remarkable. I mean, you're talking about a community that, 25 years ago came from the USSR or Russia. They didn't have the infrastructure, Jewish infrastructure, the Jewish knowledge under the communists was by definition weak. And now there's about 20% of Bukharian Jews are becoming Shomer Torah and Mitzvahs, which is remarkable. You don't find that scale of tshuva anywhere else in today's world. Back in the 70s and the 60s, yes. But today, if you want to find that moment, that movement, then look at Bukharians. So I was going to be speaking at 8 o'clock. One terrible Lashon Hara, and I know I'm being filmed, but I'm going to say this openly about Bukharian Jews. And this is pretty bad. They have no concept of time. They are not Yekis, right? It must be something to do with the Soviet Union. Yes, we'll do this. Yes, next month, 2 months, a year, 10 years. So I turned up early. What Jew turns up early? Anyway, so they said I would be speaking at 8. It was 9. Before I spoke, there was a young lady there, and they said, we want her to speak first. And she wants to tell her story. This young lady stood up and she told the following thing. She said, first of all, last Shabbat, was my 10th ever Shabbat. She's kept Shabbat 10 weeks in a row, so that all the kids, there was about 80 kids there, they all burst into applause, as I did as well. And she said something very interesting. When I started to keep Shabbat, I hated Shabbat. I hated Shabbat. And if you know anybody who's begun to keep Shabbat, well, you know there is a clear genetic distinction and difference between people who keep Shabbos and people who don't. Do you know that? Shabbos actually affects your DNA. I can prove this. What is the reaction of a Jew after they've had their Shabbos lunch and they've eaten their cholent? What does that Jew or Jewess want to do more than anything else in the world? Horizontal Judaism. Right. But somebody who doesn't keep Shabbat, Saturday is football and baseball and ice skating and they're all over the place. And anyway, so basically, she found Shabbat extraordinarily challenging. After 2 Shabbats, she said to her parents, who must be remarkable people, you've got to help me keep Shabbat. Because Shabbos afternoon was driving her nuts. Nothing to do. And if you've ever known anybody who's been at home keeping Shabbos when your parents and your family are not keeping Shabbos, that's very difficult. So she said, I want you to help me keep Shabbos. Let's play games Shabbos afternoon. And kol hakavod to this remarkable family, they switched off their phones, they switched off the TV, and they sat down and played cards with her instead of 1 hour, which was scheduled, to 2 hours, and actually enjoyed it. Imagine a family interacting instead of sort of like zoning out in their own little world on their iPhone. The girl had an ambition, a burning ambition. She'd always wanted to become a dentist. She is enrolled at St. John's University, and she desperately wanted to, she did a year pre-dentistry, and she wanted to get into the best dental school in New York, which is Columbia, apparently. They only take 24 students a year, and to get an interview, that's unbelievable. You got an interview. So she gets the interview at Columbia, and the head of the school, or one of the professors, says, I'm extremely impressed with your grades, extremely impressed with your passion, and she said that it was incredible because normally the interview lasted about 20 minutes, half an hour max. It was an hour, so that was a very good sign. Because if you're not interested in somebody, it's very good. 5 minutes, have a nice day, go away. An hour. So he said to her, I'm very impressed, and I have to tell you that I'm giving a lecture tomorrow morning in whatever lecture hall it is. I'd like you to come to that, and if you come to that lecture, you're in the program. Guess what day tomorrow morning was? Shabbos. And this is only her 9th or 8th Shabbos. This is straight off the press, this is fresh stuff. And you're not allowed to tell anybody this story until I get it into one of the newspapers I write for, and then you can tell people the story. Anyway, so she said, I'm sorry, I'm a religious Jew, I keep Shabbos. I keep the Jewish Sabbath. And he said to her, look, I'm just telling you that if you want to be in the program, then come to my lecture tomorrow morning. And she got the message he was subtly conveying. She came home and she told her parents exactly what happened. And the father said, wow, I mean, duh, you go. I don't think I can, Dad. Now they're completely secular. And their daughter, I mean, this was his ambition that's where it came from, for his daughter to get into dental school at Columbia. But wow! What do you mean it's your life? It's your career. Dad, I don't think I can. The mother said, look, that's her thing. Shabbos is her thing. You've got to support her. I'll support her, but not this. She's got to go for this one interview. Look, if you just tell God that, if it's your career, you'll sort of, give you a pass. She understood that he didn't understand how this thing works. So I don't think I can, Dad. So he said, look, we've set aside money for your application to another dental school in case you don't get in $3,500 just to apply to the school. We're going to give you the money. To show you I'm serious, I'll give you the money. And you can give it to whatever charity you want. She said her Yetzer Hara was fighting with her like crazy. Right, so maybe it's not really called Chilul Shabbos, breaking Shabbos, if you're driving in the car. Somebody's taking you. You'll get somebody else to break Shabbos. And you're going to get $3,500 to tzedakah. Right? And it's your career. I don't think I can do that. So then he, being a Jewish parent, brought out our secret weapon, the ultimate secret weapon, the guilt trip, right? Which we were all victims of, and of course, later on we practice. If you're not going to do it for you or for your career, do it for me. And she said she loves her dad. Her dad is her hero. They've got a very close relationship. And at this point, I mean, think of this poor girl. She's only kept Shabbat for 8 weeks. And now she's got one, it's her career. And now, maybe it's not called breaking Shabbos. And now it's $3,500 to charity. And now and you're breaking your dad's heart. But she didn't do it. She couldn't go and break Shabbos. So by Sunday, I think there's a phrase, it's called buyer's remorse, is that the phrase? By Sunday, she's really convinced she's made a big mistake. This is clearly the wrong thing. She's thrown away her life, she's thrown away her career, and she decided to phone her new Rebbitzin over in Queens, somebody called Shira, I don't know who the Rebbitzin is, and she's talking to her about this whole thing, and maybe I made a mistake. And the Rebbitzin said to her, look, we've covered this. We know that Hashem sends tests in life. Beginning of Mesilas Yesharim, Shlomo HaMelech talks about this. Everything in life is a test. And this is a test. I agree that this is a test which is tough, but it's a test which you passed. You shouldn't regret this. Hashem is just giving you a test. Meanwhile, while she is explaining all this to this girl, her cell phone is ringing and ringing and ringing. And basically it's driving her nuts. And she's getting, obviously, voicemails coming in, and it just keeps going. So she said, look, I'm terribly sorry. Somebody's driving me nuts. And she's crying her eyes out, let me just take this call. How funny that. So she took the call.
In regards to something I went through, there was once a time when I was having my own problem, and I was praying Tehillim for an answer to my problem, and while I was praying Tehillim, right after I closed the book, I got a phone call that gave me the answer to what I was praying for. And I see that as Shira is telling me all of this,
I'll come back.
He keeps calling and sending voicemails, and I don't want to pick up because we're having a very deep conversation, but the beeping is so annoying that I'm like, Shira, listen, I need to call you back. I have to pick up and listen to who's calling. And I'm going to play the voicemail for you guys. I sent it to her right after, but if you can't hear it, I'll say what it says right after also.
So did you get that? She is on the phone to a Rebbitzin. The Rebbitzin saying, don't give up, it's a test, and somebody's driving her nuts. She now played to the kids, and to me, she then played what the message and the voice message was. So here it goes.
This was the voicemail during the call.
hear that? Test, test, test. This is St. John's University Public Safety. Test, test, test. This is only a test. Wow! I can't believe this! So there are small miracles that happen and you see here, I've got the video here, they sent me the video. I mean, everybody just bursts out laughing, and she bursts out laughing, she's crying her eyes out. And, whoa, things like that happen. Yeah, small miracles happen all the time. How do you think she reacted when she's crying her eyes out, and then she hears this? How do you react? And then from tears to laughter. Have you ever considered what it is that makes us laugh? What is it that makes us laugh? There is an English comedian. I always forget the guy's real name, but you might know or heard of him. He's called Mr. Bean. You know Mr. Bean? Rowan Atkinson. Now, like most extremely funny people I know, Rowan Atkinson is also extremely intelligent. In fact, he's got a master's in electrical engineering from Cambridge University in England. That's pretty bright. Have you ever heard of Monty Python's Flying Circus? So I used to still, to some degree, broadcast on BBC, but when I lived in the UK, I used to have my own programs, wrote programs on BBC. So there's something called John Cleese. So I've been in programs with John Cleese. All Monty Python guys are all Cambridge University graduates. They're extremely bright. People make the mistake of thinking that funny people are just funny people. No, they're usually very intelligent people. And Rowan Atkinson lectures on the topic of laughter and what it is that makes a person laugh. And he splits comedy up into 4 categories, and you could do this differently. The great philosophers, Aristotle discussed humour and what it is that makes you laugh. I think your greatest writer, Mark Twain, he famously said, you can dissect a joke to find out what makes it funny. It's a bit like dissecting a frog. At the end of it, you're left with a dead frog, right? So you can find out if you have to explain a joke. Have you ever tried to explain a joke to somebody? Just absolutely does not work. So it's the great German philosophers discussed what it is that makes you funny, which is a bit of a contradiction in terms. Anyway, so basically he divides humour up into 4 categories. I've forgotten one of them, but the first category, he says, is slapstick. Slapstick. The old Max Sennett movies, somebody's walking along and he slips in a banana peel. And for some reason we laugh. I do not know why. If you're the person slipping on the banana peel, you don't find it even remotely funny. Then the next one, he says, category of laughter is incongruity. Something is incongruous. I remember once looking for a Google picture on the subject of humour, and there was a picture of a row of dogs, 10 dogs in a row being photographed. And there were all sorts of different types of dogs. There was collies, and there was German shepherds, and there was a poodle. I actually find poodles quite funny anyway. I just can't take a poodle seriously as a dog. All the curls and parents, what? I'm not intimidated by a poodle. So if you try and picture this, I'm sure I should have brought a picture. 5 dogs on one side, 5 dogs, and they're all sort of looking at the camera, and right in the middle, between these 10 dogs, looking at the camera, was a cat. And it just looks so weird and incongruous that it makes people laugh. But the thing that generally makes us laugh is the unexpected. After all, think about the part of the joke that you actually get people laughing from. What's that called? The punchline, right? It's the unexpected. Like a punch, you don't see it coming, it hits you, boom, and you laugh. So normally it's the unexpected. And if you have a sense of humour, by the way, it can get you out of some serious situations. I was blessed with a sense of humour. And I remember when I used to live in Manchester in England, there's a big show there called the Shrubbery Show. I'm just looking over. You're supposed to nod, right? I've got somebody to make sure I'm not lying. And it's a show which I think is it's got a capacity of about 1,000 seats, 500 upstairs. Shrubberies in sorry? No, in the Prestwich. Anyway, so they were, as they say, between rabbis at one stage, which is a nice way of saying they fired the previous guy and were looking for a new guy. They actually wanted me to become the rabbi of the synagogue, thus proving that they at least had a sense of humour. And I never saw myself as being the rabbi of a shul. I did it for 4 years. I don't have the qualities, the tact, the diplomacy. necessary to be the rabbi of the synagogue. And so I declined. It was a very generous and very sweet offer. I said, I declined the offer. But they had a problem because they had 6 consecutive bar mitzvahs coming up. And it's the sort of show, did you know, interesting fact, most English Jews are in fact Orthodox. Did you know that? About 80%. They might not be frum, but the shul they belong to is an Orthodox shul. So the rules that they don't keep are our rules. So they had 6, and it's the sort of shul that if a rabbi's not there to address a bar mitzvah boy, he's not really bar mitzvah. It's felt, as they say. So would I come and address these bar mitzvah boys? I said, of course. So I arrived on Shabbos morning, the first Shabbos morning, 9 o'clock at the shul, actually 10 to 9 because I arrived early, and the president was waiting outside to greet me, and he took me in and took me to the front, escorted me to the rabbi's box. Now, if you're American, you probably found that sentence a little bit confusing. The rabbi's box. You see, it's the same as here. You've got an Oren HaKodesh, and normally the rabbi's seat is to the right of the Oren HaKodesh, the guest rabbi's to the left. It's the exact same in England. It's just that in England, they encase the rabbi's seat in a box, which opens out at the front or the side. And as far as I know, it's only the English that do this, and I never understood why the English are so keen to put their rabbis in a wooden box. And when you consider it, he's going to be in a wooden box soon enough. Why they're trying to speed up the process, I never really understood. Anyway, so they put me into, and another interesting thing, if you've got an intuitive mind, you've probably worked out that the box would have been constructed according to the dimensions of the original rabbi of the synagogue. And it's quite obvious to me, as I tried to squeeze myself into this thing, that the original rabbi was clearly a dwarf. This guy could have got a job as an extra in The Lord of the Rings. I mean, and I sat there with my knees like under my chin. Anyway, so the shul starts to fill up slowly. I say it's traditional Jews, they're going to be there for the laning, but anyway, so by the time it got to the laning, the president came up and said, Rabbi, would you escort the Sifrei Torah in their procession to the Bima? And I said, yes, of course. So I squeezed myself out of the box, and then you go, following, and you sing Good Shabbos. By this time, it's completely full. Good Shabbos to everybody. The real rabbi probably hates them, and they hate him, but it doesn't matter. Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. On to the Bima, back to the box. And then they come up and said, we'd like to give you an aliyah. What is your Hebrew name? Yehuda Yaina ben Abraham. And so they called me up, out of the box, onto the Bima, back to the box. And then they come up and said, would you say the prayer for the state of Israel and the royal family? The royal family. You traitors. You American revolutionaries. Anyway, so I said, of course. So I went out of the box onto the Bima. By this stage, the shul's completely full. So I stood there, and the chazan of the shul was an old friend of mine from South Africa, a guy called Bertie Sander. So I whispered to him, Bertie, how do you say it? See, because some shuls say it in Hebrew, some shuls say the prayer for the royal family and the state in English, and some shuls, sneaky, do it half English and half Hebrew. So I said, how do you do it? He said, just read precisely what's in the Siddur. I said, yeah, Bertie, but how do you say it? Just read precisely what's in the Siddur. Fine? So they announced the prayer for the royal family. At that point, everybody stands up. I opened the Siddur, and I began. He who gives salvation unto kings and dominion unto princes, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, may bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, because the Queen's mother was still alive in those days. Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. The Prince and Princess of Wales. The problem was, she was dead. She had died, Princess Diana had died in that tragic car crash in the tunnel in Paris, but he told me to read precisely what was in the Siddur. It wasn't my fault they hadn't taken the bit out. And the reaction was actually quite remarkable, because there was, there's 1,000 people, there wasn't an explosion of laughter. There was an implosion of laughter. And that's a very funny sound when 1,000 people go, magnified by 1,000. You see, they didn't want to laugh because they didn't want to embarrass. For 3 reasons. A, they liked me. B, they knew I was doing them a favour by being there. And C, they knew I didn't know what I was doing. So anyway, so basically, I looked at my friend, the Chazan, Bertie, and smiled. And he smiled back. And I went back to the box. At this stage, I've been quite happy if somebody had nailed it down. I sat there melting in embarrassment. They brought the Sefer Torah back, and I was announced and introduced, which was silly, they all knew me anyway. And this little boy, this sweet little boy, stood up to hear the guest rabbi tell him the words of wisdom for his bar mitzvah. And I looked at him and I said, before I address today's bar mitzvah boy, I would just like to point out, for those of you who were listening carefully a few moments ago, you may have noticed a slight change to the normal wording for the prayer from the royal family. At this point, nobody could control themselves, and there was gales of laughter, and I waited for it to die down and for there to be complete and total silence. And I said, I would just like you to know that for some of us, she'll live forever. Now, at that point, I was off the hook. The embarrassment was gone. You turned it into something good. And if you got a sense of humour, it's a wonderful thing. I remember the first time I was asked to speak in Switzerland. Is anybody here from Switzerland? Thank God. Anyway, so I was asked to speak in Switzerland. It was for a university student weekend. I used to be very active on campuses, still speaking campuses. And so they had a gathering of Swiss students, university students. And so they asked, would I come and address them, spend a week a weekend in Switzerland. I'd always wanted to visit Switzerland. I heard they do mountains in Switzerland. And I'm Scottish, we do mountains. And I wanted to see what these substandard Swiss mountains look like. So I immediately said yes, and a week later I got a message from a cousin of the organizer in Zurich to say that they would like a tape of one of my shiurim. And I thought, that's a bit oilam hofuch, that's a bit upside down. You find out whether the guy can speak and he's any good before you issue the invitation. Not after, when he said yes. But I thought perhaps they wanted to see the cultural differences. So I sent two tapes. I sent a videotape. Do you remember videotape? I had a videotape of me talking to university students. And when I'm speaking to university students, lots of laughter, lots of humour. Just after all, we're Erev Purim, it's appropriate. For us, Erev Purim, it's certainly appropriate for university students all the time. And the second one, I sent an audio cassette of me giving a serious share, because I can do that as well, if I'm forced. So I sent two. A week later, I got a phone call from somebody in Zurich, and I picked up the phone, and a voice says, hello, is this Rav Rubinstein? I said, yes. Rav Rubinstein. Hello, this is Mark, phoning from Zurich. I said, hello, Mark. Hello, Rav Rubinstein. Rav Rubinstein, it's about the video you sent. I said, yes. We liked it very much. But when you come to Zurich, no humor, please. Absolutely true. No humor, please. Und, there was an und, you mustn't become friendly with the students. You must become friendly with the students, because in German culture, a Herr Rabbiner is aloof. Und noch an und. Do you know how much they're paying me? 2 unts. 2 unts, I double my fee. Anyway, so und, no Yiddish. Because Yiddish to a German ear sounds a bit like somebody saying, you know, it's wonderful here to be in New York, wicked, where do I drive the taxi? That sort of thing. Nothing wrong with a Jamaican accent, but you know, it sounds a bit funny. Good. So I thought, how am I going to do this? Because sense of humour, I have. Don't speak in Yiddish. I learned in Gesed Yeshiva for 7 years in Yiddish. So sometimes, you know, Yiddish word pops out, a mole. And thirdly, aloof. I'm not that sort of rabbi. So how am I going to get through the... I shouldn't tell you this. This is where I ruined my reputation. I thought, how am I going to get through these 4 or 5 days in Zurich? Did you ever see Star Trek? I'm talking the old Star Trek, when Vulcans were Jewish. I pretended to be Mr. Spock for 4 days. Logical. Anyway, so on Sunday night, the Frum ladies of Zurich heard I was in town, and they asked if I'd give a shiur to them. This time it had to be in Yiddish. I said, of course. This is different. So I walked in there, a big pile of svarim. There was a whole, I've got a picture in my mind of maybe 600 ladies. The Alta Bobas was sitting in the front, like this. And I put down my svarim. This was, the organization was called the Agudas Fraugruppen. Sounds like German paratroops or something. Anyway, it's a gutes Frauengruppe. So I had my Sforim on the table, and then I realized I made an enormous mistake. I had forgotten to ask how long I should speak for. You want to make sure you tell the speaker how long you speak for. So I said to him, "Entschuldige me, excuse me, wie lange muss ich etwas reden? How long should I speak for?" And a voice shot back from the back of the hall in English with an American accent, "That depends." And they all started to laugh. They were laughing. I spent 4 days with the living dead, and here they are laughing. And then I discovered that most of the women in Zurich are not Swiss. No, they're Americans, Canadians, English, normal human beings. And so they had a sense of humor. Actually, I'm being very unfair. The Swiss actually do have a sense of humor. It's just very different to yours. If you hear something funny, you let go. In Switzerland, humor should evoke no more than That's absolutely true. Anything more than it's considered rude. That's absolutely true. So it can, but sense of humour, it's usually the unexpected that makes you laugh. I remember I lived in Manchester. Manchester's, you will attest, is a very rainy place. It rains all the time. I remember once the front doorbell rang. I opened the door and there my late mother-in-law was standing there in the rain. She was soaked, drenched. I said, "Mother-in-law, what are you doing standing there in the rain? You're soaked. Go home." Now, the reason that joke works is because of the unexpected. You expected me to say, "Mother-in-law, you're soaked, come in." But that's only because you never met my late mother-in-law. But in actual fact, humour and laughter is a hugely important thing. The Gemara Very good.
Somehow he understands that one very well.
Yeah.
So unexpected.
Yes, that's right. The Gemara talks about this. This is in Tainus and Kaf Beis. And this, I've had many rabbis quote this, and for some reason they quote it abruptly. They stop. But the Gemara says the following thing, very interesting. How important is laughter? How important is that in Jewish life? So listen to this. The Gemara says the following thing. There was a rabbi called Rabbi Broika. Rabbi Broika chazusa how shiki b'shukah debit lefet. Rabbi Broika was found commonly in a marketplace, a Jewish marketplace called Beit Lefet. And when he was there, Shika Eliyahu Gabei. When he used to be there, he used to bump into Eliyahu Hanavi. Amalei, Ika b'hai shuka bar alma da'osi. Is there anybody in this shuk, in this marketplace? Now, how many Jews in the marketplace? 400, 500, 600? Anybody here going to go to heaven? To which he turned around and said, "That fellow over there." So Rabbi Baruch goes over to the fellow, and incidentally, do you find that a strange question? Is there anybody here going to Olam Haba? What did we say at the beginning of Pirkei Avos when we start reading Pirkei Avos in the summer? Kol Yisrael Yishem Chelik L'Olam Haba. The Al Shulchan Kodesh, my favorite commentator, he points out in his Pirkei Avos, which I translated, he says it doesn't say Kol Yisrael Yishem Chelik Bet Olam Haba. Every Jew's got a place in heaven. It says Kol Yisrael Yishem Chelik Le Olam Haba. Every Jew's got a place, a way to get to heaven, a road mapped out for them. But did they take that road? Did they maximize their potential? That was their choice. So he said, anybody here who's going to Olam Haba? He says, that fellow over there. So he went over to this fellow, and he said, "My Daka, what do you do? What sort of thing do you think a Jew could do that guarantees him or her a place in Olam Haba?" If I offer you that as a suggestion, what sort of thing would you say? Oh, if I didn't tell you yet, what's coming into your mind? Oh, he must have done what?
Be a guest speaker in this show.
Be a guest speaker. Depends on the show. Switzerland, certainly. Anything?
Given his life.
Sorry?
Given his life position.
Very good. Well done. Yeah. If you're moist and nefesh, if you save a life, it's like saving a world. I have a brother-in-law who's a Rav in London, originally from Morocco. He saved 3 girls who were drowning off the coast of Netanya. That's oil. So you do something like that. It turns out this fellow was blessed with one of the rare gifts that sometimes individual Jews are given. He didn't look Jewish. He had blonde hair and blue eyes, a red beard, well, was, which incidentally David Melech had, but basically he didn't look Jewish. Sometimes a Jew born not looking Jewish can save lots of lives. And basically what happened was he was in charge of a prison. The Romans commonly would take a Jew on a trumped-up charge, stick them in prison, and then just demand a lot of money to get the Jew out. Obviously, if it was a woman, Rahman al-Islam, who was taken captive by the Romans, I don't have to go into detail, but you can imagine by the time the money was paid, the worst things would have happened. He made sure that nobody laid a finger on any Jewish woman who was taken captive. And then he says, anybody else going to Oim Haba? At this point, I will read to you the Gemara, just so you can see I'm actually a qualified rabbi. He says, those two guys over there, brothers, were also people are going to heaven. Also the Gabayo, he goes over to these guys. He says to them, what do you guys do? We're comedians. We're comedians. Now that's the bit that sometimes rabbis quote and then stop, and the implication is you can make people laugh on the ball. Nonsense. Total nonsense. Anybody can tell a joke, that doesn't get you on the ball. It's the next bit that's crucial. On the Madchinen at Sivi, we find people who are depressed, and we make them laugh again. What makes a person depressed? There are two types of depression. Any psychologists here? So there are different schools of laughter, different schools of philosophy, lots of different schools of psychology. So one of the schools splits depression into, gives you there's depression, which is it's the way you're born. Your brain just doesn't create enough of the happy chemical serotonin, and therefore, thank God, with the Chesed of Hashem Yisbarach, there is lots of medications that can be given that replicate and fill in that missing gap for people who are born that's there the way they are. But there's also something called reactive depression, and usually things that happen to you in your life can provoke you to, as it were, lose that happy state, at least temporarily. And in one school, well, maybe you can think of what sort of thing would cause a person to become depressed? A death, very good. So if somebody, God forbid, if you lose a parent, can make you depressed, a sibling, Chalila b'Chalila, a child, we all want our children to be sitting Shiva for us one day, do we not? The opposite is not acceptable. So it could be a bereavement. Bereavement is one category of a trigger for reactive depression. Anything else?
Losing a job?
Very good, yes. Losing a job. That's a classic trigger, right? You could pay your bills, you could pay the lease in your car, you could pay the mortgage, etc., and suddenly you lose it all. That can be a trigger for reactive depression. Anything else? Well, if the doctor tells you you've got a terribly serious illness, then that can be a trigger for depression. And the fourth one's interesting. Divorce. Now, it really depends on the marriage. But in this model, it's not actually cited as one of the examples. But the interesting one is moving. Moving. For example, I lived in a leafy suburb called Broughton Park, a beautiful suburb of Manchester, and I moved to Flatbush. Just where Jewish Flatbush becomes Islamabad. I mean, this is clearly, reason to become depressed. So it's moving, and you think about it, I'm obviously making a joke, and this obviously must apply to everybody here, because your Alta Zetas, or Alta Zetas, they moved. It was easy for me to move here. I've been lecturing here for 10 years. I speak the same language, nearly. My wife is American. But if you're, let's say, you came from Russia, and you don't speak the language, it can overwhelm you. Incidentally, I can't resist telling you that what we're discussing is discussed by Rashi over 1,000 years ago. This you've got to hear. The Jewish people were, after 40 years, about to go into the land of Israel. The quick way is through the land of Edom. And in Bamidbar and Kof Aleph, chapter 21 and verse Dalet, Vayisami Horahor, because Edom came out with his army and said, you want to come through my land, Jews? It's war. So it says they traveled from Horahor, Derek Yam, so back the way they came, after 40 years of effort, and they're just about to, can just touch it. No, got to go back. But he's in Horahor to circumnavigate. He said, as Eretz Edom, listen, V'titzar nefesh ha'om b'derech. V'titzar nefesh ha'om b'derech. The soul of the people became titzar. Titzar is the word kitzur. What does kitzur mean? Shorten, shrunk, depressed. squished, depressed. And Rashi says here, astonishing thing, B'titzah nefesh ha'om. Listen to this, they're called Dover HaKasha ala Odom. This is Rashi, 1,000 years ago. Anything that's hard for a person to deal with. Novel boy loshen kitzur nefesh. The word kitzur nefesh, depression, applies. Ka'odom shetarach ma'alav. If things go wrong in your life, listen, the language is so poetic. And your mind is not broad enough to bear the pain you're going through. Think of our categories before, a bereavement, etc., etc. And you've got no place in your heart to accommodate, to accommodate the pain that you're suffering. Kitzur nefesh. So Rashi summed that up 1,000 years ago. Quite amazing. Interestingly, here, Rashi says, what did they do to take people who were depressed, and the Yiddish word is tzibrochen, and bring them back to life? Rashi says, Beduch, he said they're comedians. Samechim and samchem b'nei Odom. They were jolly, and they made other people jolly. But Rashi doesn't say how. On the other side of the page, commentator Rabbi Hanano says, they had the verbal dexterity, they could tell happy things to make people happy. But again, how? Doesn't say. My favourite commentator when we're looking at pieces of Gemara which talk about these sorts of stories, called the Gadata, was the Marsha, but after that I like the Ben Ish Chai, the great Sephardi giant of Baghdad. And he introduces you to into a bit of Kabbalistic Judaism. The Zohar says that Hashem created the world from the four basic elements, which are fire and water, earth and air. The Zohar also says that Hashem's name has got 4 letters. So we've got 4 basic elements and 4 letters of Hashem's name. And it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. The first Hey, he says, if I remember correctly, that stands for Ha'aretz, earth, one of the basic elements. And it's the way of this world to pull us down, is it not? In this world there's gravity, it pulls you down, it depresses you. Have you ever discussed with anybody who's suffered depression, they feel as though there's a big weight squishing them down. This world pulls you down. But the second Hey in Hashem's name starts, it parallels Ish, a flame. And what's the direction of a flame? Heavenward. Towards heaven, it dances towards heaven. And then the Ben Ish Chai just adds a couple of words that brings this idea completely to life. This world pulls you down. Our perspective down here depresses you. But a perspective of Shemayim, of heaven, Zu Bina, he writes. That's understanding. When you get it, there's nothing worse than not getting the joke. When I first moved here, there was a bunch of guys, and after a shir I gave, and one guy says, "Hey, do you know there's a bridge in Queens called the Kosciuszko Bridge?" I said, "Pardon?" He said, "Do you know there's a bridge in Queens called the Kosciuszko Bridge?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I think I've actually driven over this." He said, "Do you know why there's a bridge in Queens called the Kosciuszko Bridge?" I said, "No." He said, "It was named after a famous Polish general." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You know why there's a bridge in Queens named after a famous Polish general?" I said, "No." He said, "It's meant to be a tunnel." And everybody started laughing. Because in New York, apparently, the Helmers are the dumb guys are meant to be the Poles, which is obviously nonsense. And where I come from, it's meant to be the Irish. And I didn't. Get it. No, there's nothing worse than not getting the joke, right? In this world, we often don't get the joke. When you do get the joke, it's usually the unexpected, and that's when you laugh. Here we don't get it. But if you give a perspective of Shemayim, then you get the joke. Zu Bina, then it's understanding. Are you with me? Look, I'll explain this to you with a story. This story is a true story. I'm able to tell you the story because the principal, the person in the story, allows me to tell the story. It's actually my son. My oldest son, he's had his own difficult times in life. When he was 14, he was in a wheelchair for a year. He had major surgery on his legs, which he's had repeatedly. I was with him in Yerushalayim, where he now lives, for 2 years ago. He had major surgery again in his legs. And he's in his own tough times now. My late wife, Sean, died of breast cancer. As he lost his mummy, and he's in his own tough times. My son is a professional photographer, and he works for somebody called Rabbi YY Hillel, one of the greats of the generation. He was a very remarkable Jew. Being a Sephardi, he's much more eclectic than an Ashkenazi Gadol might be. And he's trying to set up a museum which will tell the true story of the history of Klal Yisrael, the terrorist story of Klal Yisrael. And he's got a studio in which manuscripts, lost manuscripts of medieval manuscripts, including Rishonim, are being rediscovered and saved. And my son, he's an expert in photographing medieval manuscripts. That's quite a chochmah, because often it's dealing with the parchment, it can easily turn to dust. You know, it's quite a thing. So he's got three studios doing this sort of work. So trying to get the time scale right here, this is about 6 years ago, my son phoned me up and said, Dad, I didn't want to worry you, but I've just come back from the doctor, and they've confirmed a diagnosis he was worried about. And I'll be totally blind in 10 years' time. I'll be totally blind in 10 years' time. So I have to tell you, I wrote a book one of my books is on the subject of dealing with people who are seriously ill. It's called The Little Book for Big Worries, which I've got the chutzpah to tell you should own. Not because I'm trying to sell it, but because we'll all be dealing with people who are seriously sick at one point in our life, or at many points probably. You want to do it well. So I wrote a book which, I can tell you, has helped thousands of people. And I'm a rabbi. I deal with people and their difficulties and their problems all day long. But when my own son told me he was going to be totally blind in 10 years' time, I was floored. A year later, he was in Manchester photographing a wedding. He was due to fly back to Eretz Yisrael through Frankfurt with Lufthansa, the German airline, which is a very nice airline to fly on. And the last minute, his flight was cancelled. So he had to fly instead directly from Manchester with an airline called EasyJet. Have you ever heard of EasyJet? Yeah. Oh, yeah. The seats are plastic. This one here is padded. These are plastic seats. Imagine an airplane with a plastic seat. The cup holder in the seat in front of you has clearly been unscrewed from a coat hanger. You put your cup and just go straight through. My son was at the back of the plane because he sort of got this last minute place. And because he has trouble with his legs, he decided to pay a little bit more money and get an extra legroom seat. And so he moved to the front of the plane. Sat down, there's a fellow sitting there already, and the fellow said in a Manchester accent, "Hello," and my son said, "Hello," and the fellow said, "Do you live in Israel or do you live in England?" He said, "No, I live in Israel." "Whereabouts?" He said. My son said, "Yerushalayim." "Where do you live?" The fellow said, "I live in Renana." He said, you were born in England, in Manchester." "No." He said, "No, actually I wasn't born in Manchester. I was born in Gateshead." Have you ever heard of Gateshead? In the northeast of England. Well, Lakewood is to America. Gateshead is to England. Actually, I was in Lakewood 2 years ago, and I said, actually, in Gateshead, we think Lakewood is reform. They did not like this joke. I don't know. I'm not been invited back. Anyway, so Gateshead, my son said, I was born in Gateshead. I was brought up in Manchester, I was born in Gateshead. "Oh, Gateshead," said the fellow. "I know Gateshead very well, because when I studied medicine at the University of Newcastle, which is just across the river from Gateshead, I used to learn with a very well-known rabbi. Have you ever heard of Rabbi YY Rubinstein?" He said to me. And my son said, "Yes, I've heard of him, that's my father." And so when he realized he was going to be sitting on a plane for 5 hours next to a doctor, well, Jewish and Scottish, free consultation. So he told him all about his problems, the problems he had with his legs, and how his mother had passed away from cancer, and how that he would by then be totally blind in 9 years' time. And the doctor said, "Well, as a matter of fact, you're wrong. I'm an eye specialist. And we developed a surgical technique 1.5 years ago in which they put a solid lens inside the eye that stops it changing shape, which leads to the blindness. And I'll do that for you." Now, my wife says that I've got to be very careful what I say next. I do not want you to believe or think that I've got an ego problem. In fact, I can think of fewer people in the world who deserve less to have an ego problem than me. However, it would be fair to be able to claim that I have had, at this stage of my life, tens of thousands of talmidim and talmidas. Before I moved here, I was the official campus rabbi to 14 universities in the northwest of England. So I looked after 3,000 Jewish students for 25 years on campus. And I taught in yeshivas and seminaries, 6 years ago, I was invited to speak to the 5,000 ladies who gather in the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av in Binyani Umah, the big hall there. That was 5,000. And if somebody teaches you one Devar Torah, then David HaMelech says they become your Rebbe. So I could lay claim to having tens of thousands of Talmidim. And I have to tell you that this doctor who was sitting in the plane, Dr. Andrew Fink, was my first ever Talmud. You see, when I moved to America, I moved to work for an organization, turned out not to be much of an organization. To work for a rabbi turned out not to be a rabbi. For a job that was supposed to last 3 years and lasted 10 months. And I must admit that I was a little bit depressed. Because I still had a house in England I was paying a mortgage on. I was paying a horrible, great big rent in a horrible flat in Flatbush. And, how am I going, And I must admit, and I think we all know, even the greatest sometimes got a bit depressed. David HaMelech said, Keli, Keli, lama azoftani. Why have you, I can't see the Yad Hashem in my life. And I must admit, I was feeling of that. And then I remembered this story. Because when I thought that Hashem had forgotten all about YY Rubinstein, then he had written down in his little book that I had taught this fellow. Project Seed came from America, landed in England, landed in Gateshead, and 30 of us used to go from the yeshiva across to Newcastle, just across the river, every Wednesday night to teach the people in the town of Newcastle. And I had this young university student, Andy Fink, who went on to become a well-known eye specialist in Israel. And when I thought Hashem had forgotten all about me, he'd written down in his little book that I had done this mitzvah, and believe it or not, this is 40 years later. 40 years later, he makes a flight from Lufthansa cancelled, so my son is going to be in a plane sitting next to a guy who's going to say, oh yeah, I can sort that problem. My first ever time. How do you think I reacted when I discovered that the doctor who was going to save my son's sight was my first ever Talmud? Well, I cried. But after I cried, I laughed. It's the unexpected that makes us laugh. When things are really dark. How dark was it in Shushan? How dark was it when the poster said Auschwitz opens in a few months' time? That's when the Jews are being sent by cattle truck to be finished off. And all the anti-Semites are going, we're going to get you. How dark was it? And then, quite the opposite. The day when the Jews are supposed to be killed, they kill the anti-Semites. The gallows constructed by Haman to kill Mordecai House, and it's completely the other way about. Unexpected. Poof. That's why Purim is such a day of laughter and simcha and rejoicing. Look, sometimes we all go through tough times, do we not? Put your hand up here if you've never gone through tough times in your life. Yeah, nobody, I've never asked that question, I've never seen a hand go. We all go through tough times. Well, here's the important rule. That Hashem is there. It's just that in this world we don't see Him, and this world pulls you down. But there are people who can get you to see Him, like these two Badchonim, who were able to get people to see the other side. Look, when I was a kid growing up in Glasgow in Scotland, my parents had a TV. And there was a film which I saw, I think when I was 9 years of age. It was a long time ago. But it was called Fiddler on the Roof. Now, I know you don't know what a film is, or a TV. However, this film was a big hit, and there's a song in it, which I can't remember very well, but it's called If I Was a Rich Man, doidy 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 doidy. And I can't remember exactly how it goes, but there's a line in it which says, and if I was a rich man, people would come and ask me for advice all day long. That stuck in my mind. And I think what the Jewish people have done, very successfully, for the last 3,500 years, has been able to turn to other Jews for advice. Long before there was psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors and psychoanalysis and now life coaches, what they are exactly. There are people who have been able to turn to advice, and you'll always get it because you're members of Klal Yisrael. Look, as I said to you, I could not be the rabbi of a synagogue. I do not, long term anyway, I do not possess the tact and diplomacy necessary. I knew this when I moved to New York, and I heard people, particularly in New York, saying, and particularly in Brooklyn, they're anticipating spending their summer vacation in the mountains. Now, I should have shut up. I should have held my peace. But I'm afraid, being Scottish, I said, very sorry. Of course, when they say the mountains, they mean the Catskills. Now, I should have been quiet, but no. I'm afraid the Catskills are not mountains. The Catskills are hills. In fact, the Catskills are not even hills. The Catskills are pimples. I don't know what you're wearing on your feet now, particularly the ladies wearing your low heels, high heel, medium, but that doesn't matter. That will be enough to get you to the top of Catskill. But if you want to climb a Scottish mountain, then you need serious climbing boots, because we do mountains. You want to get to the top of a Swiss mountain, you need professional gear. You do big mountains. And if you want to get to the top of the highest mountain in the world, which is called Everest, then you need a team of supporters and helpers to get you to the top. You know what they're called? Sherpas. I like that word. It sounds like the Yiddish word schleppers. And that's and that's precisely what they do. Any idea how many in a team of Sherpas to get to the top? Average 50. 10 stay at the bottom and make a base camp. 40 go with you to the next Madriga, they make a camp. Then 30 go to the next, and eventually you get to the top. The higher the mountain you have to climb, the more help you need to get there. And we all have tough times. But when you go through the tough times, and you find the person, and you'll always find the person, like the two Badchonim were able to get people to see the world, not from this perspective, but to get the joke, then you laugh again. And then you're able to see it. Purim was the quintessential time of a dark time, and then boom, it swaps around. You see it from Hashem's point of view, all the bits, and he has to ask us, I'm hiding myself in that day until he wasn't hiding anymore. We're surrounded by miracles all the time. This girl answers the phone and just crying her eyes out when the Rebbe is telling her it's a test, it's a test. Test. This is only a test. Rabbeinu Shalom. Purim is only a test. Was Purim a drama? Or was Purim a comedy? At the end of the story, it was a comedy. And the bad guys will get egg all over the face. And Vashti, she's gone. All the bad guys lost and we win. But you have to be able to look and see, or somebody to show you that the story in actual fact is a comedy, with laughter at the end of it, not a tragedy. That's the story of our lives. But when you're in it, you just feel the pain. But Baruch Hashem, we're members of Klal Yisrael. If Purim tells us anything, it is that there's always a Mordechai. There's always somebody who can show you the other side and turn the sad times and the tragedy into great times full of simcha and laughter. Thank you very much. And there's a book called Jewish Life and Jewish Laughter, by an incredible coincidence, over here.